The wind howled like a hungry wolf, tearing at the sturdy logs of Luke McAllister's cabin, a relentless white blur engulfing the rugged Montana hills. Inside, the crackle of the fireplace offered scant comfort against the encroaching cold, its warmth a small island in a sea of biting frost. Luke, a man whose hands were calloused from years of wrangling cattle and mending fences, a man whose face was etched with the lines of a solitary existence, stared out the frosted window. The blizzard was one of the worst he'd seen in years, a harbinger of the deep winter that always settled heavy and unforgiving over his isolated ranch. He was a creature of habit and solitude, finding his rhythm in the vast, untamed landscape, his only companions, the sturdy horses in the barn, and the loyal, grizzled ranch dog, Gus, currently curled by the hearth, snoring softly. Peace, for Luke, was the absence of complication, the quiet predictability of ranch life. He cherished it, guarded it, and never imagined it would be shattered by a gentle knock. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. He was just settling down with a well-worn book, the scent of pine and wood smoke thick in the air, when a faint thud echoed from his porch. It wasn't the usual creak of the wind or the settling of snow. It was softer, more insistent, a sound that pricked at the edge of his awareness. Gus, usually oblivious to anything beyond his immediate comfort, lifted his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Luke's brow furrowed. No one ventured this deep into the hills during a storm like this, not unless they were truly desperate or gravely mistaken. With a sigh that stirred the quiet air, he rose, pulling on his thickest wool jacket and a worn leather hat. The porch light, usually a beacon, was barely visible through the swirling snow. As he pushed open the heavy wooden door, the cold slapped him, sharp and immediate. Lying huddled against the doorframe, a ghostly figure almost swallowed by the accumulating snow, was a woman. She was wrapped in what looked like a thin, inadequate coat, her hair a tangle of dark strands plastered to her face, and her skin, even in the dim light, was alarmingly pale. What truly stole his breath, though, was the pronounced swell of her belly. She was pregnant, unmistakably so, and clearly in distress. A wave of something akin to primal alarm surged through Luke. This wasn't just a lost hiker. This was a life, 2 lives, hanging by a thread on his doorstep. "Hey!" he called out, his voice rough with concern, his own words feeling inadequate against the roar of the wind. He knelt, the snow immediately soaking through his jeans, and gently touched her shoulder. Her skin was icy. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing a startling shade of blue, wide and unfocused, filled with a raw, desperate fear. A soft, barely audible moan escaped her lips before they parted. "Please," she whispered, her voice reedy and broken. "Help me." And then, just as quickly as her eyes had opened, they closed, and she slumped further against him, unconscious. Luke didn't hesitate. Years of living alone had taught him self-reliance and a swift, decisive response in emergencies. He carefully scooped her up, surprised by how light she felt despite her pregnancy. Her body was rigid with cold, and he could feel the tremor running through her. He carried her inside, kicking the door shut with his foot, the storm's fury momentarily held at bay. The warmth of the cabin, which moments before had felt merely comforting, now seemed a vital sanctuary. He laid her gently on the worn leather couch near the fireplace, Gus immediately trotting over, sniffing curiously at the unconscious woman before settling down with a low whine, as if sensing her vulnerability. Luke moved with practiced efficiency. He fetched a thick wool blanket from the cedar chest, wrapping it around her shivering form. Then, he went to the kitchen, stoking the fire in the old wood stove, the scent of simmering water and herbs soon filling the air as he began to prepare a restorative broth, a simple recipe passed down through generations. He'd seen plenty of animals frozen, but never a human, let alone one in such a delicate condition. A deep, unfamiliar anxiety gnawed at him. He was a cowboy, not a nurse, and certainly not equipped to deliver a baby in a blizzard. As the steam rose from the broth, Luke returned to her side, his gaze sweeping over her still face. She looked younger than he had initially thought, and there was a fragile beauty about her, even in her current state of distress. He noticed a faint bruise blooming on her temple, almost hidden by her hair, and a subtle tension in her jaw. It hinted at a story, a history he couldn't yet comprehend, a reason for her desperate flight into the heart of the storm. He pushed the thought aside for now. His immediate priority was to get her warm, to get her to eat. Hours passed. The blizzard raged outside, a relentless white curtain obscuring the world. Inside, the quiet was punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional soft whimper from the woman on the couch. Luke sat in his worn armchair, Gus at his feet, watching her, a strange mix of apprehension and protectiveness settling over him. He felt a profound sense of responsibility for this unknown life he'd pulled from the jaws of the storm. He was accustomed to tending to his own wounds, to fighting the elements. But this was different. This was a vulnerability he hadn't encountered before, a softness that seemed to call out to something deep within him, something he hadn't realized was dormant. Finally, just as the first faint hint of dawn began to paint the sky with bruised purples and grays, her eyes fluttered open again. This time, they held more focus, though a bewildered fear still clouded their depths. She blinked slowly, her gaze sweeping around the unfamiliar room, finally landing on Luke. Her hand instinctively went to her swollen belly, a protective gesture. Where am I?" she whispered, her voice still weak but clearer now. "My cabin," Luke replied, his voice a low rumble, intentionally gentle. "You collapsed on my porch. The blizzard's pretty bad." She tried to push herself up, but a wave of dizziness washed over her, and she slumped back against the cushions. "The storm," she murmured, a flicker of something close to panic in her eyes. I have to keep going." "Going where?" Luke asked, his gaze steady. "There's nowhere to go in this kind of weather. You need to rest, you and the baby." At the mention of the baby, her eyes widened further, a new vulnerability shadowing them. She averted her gaze, her fingers tracing the patterns on the blanket. "I'm Clara," she said, almost too softly to hear. "Clara Hayes." "Luke McAllister," he responded, offering a small, reassuring nod. "I've got some broth. You need to eat." He brought her a steaming mug of the rich, savory liquid. She took a tentative sip, then another, and he watched as a faint blush of color returned to her cheeks. The exhaustion was still profound, but the immediate crisis seemed to be passing. As she drank, he noticed the way she flinched slightly when Gus, emboldened by her regained consciousness, nudged her hand with his wet nose. There was a guardedness about her, a subtle fear that went beyond the immediate shock of her ordeal. It was the fear of someone who had learned to be wary, to anticipate pain. "Thank you," she said, her voice gaining a little strength, her eyes meeting his again. "Thank you for everything." "Just glad I was here," Luke said, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't a man of many words, preferring actions to declarations, but he hoped his sincerity was evident. Clara finished the broth, and the warmth seemed to seep into her bones. She closed her eyes for a moment, a deep sigh escaping her. When she opened them, a shadow of resignation crossed her face. "I don't have anywhere to go," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I was trying to get away." Luke felt a familiar tightness in his chest. "Away from what?" he asked, though he suspected the answer. The bruise, the fear, the desperation. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands, which were now clasped tightly in her lap. "My husband," she finally confessed, her voice barely audible. He wasn't kind." A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from memory. Luke's jaw tightened. He had a deep-seated aversion to cruelty, particularly against the vulnerable. The thought of anyone harming Clara, especially in her delicate condition, ignited a quiet fury within him. "You're safe here," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "For as long as you need." Clara looked up at him, her blue eyes wide with surprise, then a flicker of relief. It was a small thing, that flicker, but it resonated with Luke. He saw the genuine gratitude there, the raw vulnerability, and it stirred a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. He was a man of his word, and he would keep her safe. The blizzard might rage outside, but inside, a new kind of quiet began to settle, one filled with the unspoken promise of shelter and a tentative, unexpected companionship. He knew, even then, that his life had irrevocably changed the moment he opened his door to the pregnant stranger. The peace he'd always sought now felt hollow without the faint stir of her breath, the subtle shift of her presence in his solitary world. Days bled into a week, and the blizzard, though it had lessened its fury, still held the hills captive, making travel impossible. Clara, slowly but surely, began to mend. The deep exhaustion that had gripped her gradually receded, replaced by a fragile strength. The bruise on her temple faded to a faint discoloration, but the deeper scars, the invisible ones, remained, manifesting in subtle ways. She flinched at sudden movements, her eyes darted nervously when Luke raised his voice, even in casual conversation, and she often stared into the distance, lost in a world only she could see. Luke noticed it all. He was a man of keen observation, accustomed to reading the nuances of the land and the animals, and now he applied that same careful attention to Clara. He gave her the guest room, a small, cozy space he rarely used, filled with a faint scent of lavender and old books. He moved with a quiet deference around her, ensuring she had space, warmth, and the simple, nourishing food he prepared. He wasn't a gourmet cook, but his stews were hearty, his bread fresh, and his coffee strong. He taught her how to stoke the fire properly, showed her the various tools in his workshop, and even let her help him with the lighter chores around the cabin, a way to keep her occupied and feel useful, not just a burden. She, in turn, offered to wash dishes, fold laundry, and even attempted to knit a small baby blanket with some yarn she found in an old drawer, her fingers clumsy at first, then growing more adept. Their conversations were initially sparse, tentative, like two strangers circling each other in a vast, empty room. Luke, accustomed to long stretches of silence, found himself prompting her with questions about her past, not out of morbid curiosity, but a genuine desire to understand, to know the woman he had pulled from the DA. Storm. Clara, though guarded, gradually began to open up, her words coming in hushed tones, almost confessional. She spoke of a life in a small town, a hasty marriage to a man who had initially been charming, then gradually turned possessive, controlling, and eventually, violent. The fear in her eyes when she recounted these details was palpable, a chilling testament to the trauma she had endured. She had finally fled when his anger escalated, when she realized the danger to her unborn child. She had aimed for a distant relative's house, a vague hope in the back of her mind, but the storm had caught her unawares, forcing her onto his porch. "I just kept walking," she confessed one evening, staring into the flickering flames of the fireplace. "I didn't care where, just away. I knew I couldn't bring a baby into that." Her voice was laced with a quiet, fierce determination that surprised Luke. He saw then that beneath the fragile exterior was a resilience forged in hardship. Luke listened, his own heart aching with a mixture of anger and sympathy. He had seen the raw edges of life, the harshness of the world, but this kind of deliberate cruelty sickened him. He found himself wanting to shield her, to protect her from any further harm. This feeling, this nascent protectiveness, was something new for him. He had always been a man of self-sufficiency, his emotional landscape as stark and unyielding as the Montana mountains. Now, Clara was softening the edges, bringing an unexpected warmth to his solitary existence. As the days turned into weeks, a comfortable rhythm settled between them. The initial awkwardness faded, replaced by an easy companionship. They shared meals, silent stretches punctuated by the soft sounds of eating and the crackle of the fire. They talked about simple things, the weather, the animals, the small joys of everyday life. Luke found himself telling her stories of the ranch, of his family, of the land that had sustained generations of M.C. Allisters. He spoke of his parents, both gone now, and the quiet loneliness that had settled over the ranch after their passing. Clara, in turn, spoke of her dreams for the baby, a quiet longing for a safe, loving home, a life free from fear. He began to notice the small things about her, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that had been rare at first, but was becoming more frequent. He noticed the soft curve of her belly, growing more pronounced with each passing day, a constant reminder of the new life she carried. He noticed the gentle way she stroked Gus, who had adopted her as his own, rarely leaving her side. He found himself looking forward to her quiet presence, to the sound of her soft voice, to the flicker of light that she brought into his once dim world. One afternoon, as Luke was fixing a broken fence post near the cabin, Clara joined him, carefully navigating the snow-covered ground. She watched him work, her gaze thoughtful. "You love this place, don't you?" she asked, her voice soft. He paused, leaning against the fence, a faint smile touching his lips. "It's in my blood," he replied, looking out at the snow-covered expanse. Generations of MC Allisters. It's tough, but it's honest. And it's home. "It's beautiful," she said, her eyes sweeping over the landscape, even in the winter. A wistful sigh escaped her. "I've never really had a home like this. My parents, they moved around a lot for work. After that, it was just wherever he said we were." Luke looked at her, a pang in his chest. "Everyone deserves a home," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them. He saw the yearning in her gaze, the deep desire for roots, for stability, for a place where she belonged. And in that moment, something shifted within Luke. He realized that the quiet peace he had always cherished was no longer enough. The idea of a future without Clara and the baby, a return to his solitary existence, suddenly felt profoundly bleak. He found himself wanting to offer her that home, not just as a temporary shelter, but as a permanent sanctuary. The baby's due date loomed closer, a joyous anticipation mixed with a growing sense of trepidation. Clara's pregnancy was advancing, and Luke, with the nearest town, a difficult journey away, even in good weather, felt a growing sense of responsibility to ensure her safety. He meticulously cleaned and prepared a small room, usually used for storage, into a makeshift nursery. He ordered a crib and other baby essentials from the nearest town through his infrequent supply runs, hoping they would arrive before the snow locked them in completely again. He even started reading through an old, dusty book on midwifery he'd found in his grandmother's attic, his brow furrowed in concentration as he deciphered the antiquated instructions. One evening, as Clara was experiencing Braxton Hicks contractions, a natural part of late pregnancy, a wave of fear washed over her. Luke, ever watchful, saw the tremor in her hands, the panic in her eyes. He sat beside her, his large hand gently resting on her arm. "It's all right, Clara," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "It's just practice. The baby's just getting ready." She leaned into his touch, finding comfort in his steady presence. "I'm scared, Luke," she admitted, her voice soft, scared of everything, of being a mother, of doing it alone, of him finding me. "You're not alone," Luke said, his gaze firm, meeting hers. "And he won't find you here. I won't let him." His words were a promise, a vow carved from the depths of his growing affection. He realized, with a startling clarity, that his feelings for Clara had deepened beyond mere compassion or protectiveness. He was falling in love with her, slowly, irrevocably, like the quiet, persistent accumulation of snow on the Montana plains. He loved her resilience, her quiet strength, her burgeoning hope for a better future. And he loved the unseen life she carried, a life that was already weaving itself into the fabric of his own. The air grew heavy with anticipation, the cabin filled with the quiet hum of two lives intricately intertwined. The blizzard had left them isolated, yes, but in that isolation, a bond had formed, fragile at first, then growing stronger with each passing day. Luke, the reclusive cowboy, found his world expanding, not shrinking, to accommodate the presence of this pregnant stranger. He found joy in her laughter, solace in her companionship, and a profound sense of purpose in protecting her and the nascent life within her. He was no longer just a man living alone on a ranch. He was becoming a man who yearned for a family, a future he hadn't known he wanted, a future that suddenly felt more real and more precious than any peace he had ever known. The silence of his cabin, once comforting, now felt empty when she wasn't there, and his heart, once guarded, was now open, vulnerable, and deeply in love. The Montana winter tightened its grip, transforming the landscape into a vast, silent expanse of light. Inside Luke's cabin, however, the air thrummed with a different kind of tension, one born not of cold, but of life on the cusp of arrival. Clara was now well past her due date, and the waiting was a palpable presence, a hushed anticipation that settled over everything. Her movements were slower, more deliberate, and the subtle shifts in her posture spoke of the discomfort of late pregnancy. Luke, ever vigilant, watched her with a mixture of quiet awe and growing anxiety. He found himself instinctively touching her arm, offering support as she navigated the cabin, his gaze often lingering on her swollen belly, a silent acknowledgement of the impending miracle. He had become remarkably adept at preparing for the baby's arrival. The makeshift nursery, though simple, was clean and warm. He had boiled water, laid out fresh linens, and even practiced the breathing exercises he'd gleaned from the midwifery book, much to Clara's amused, though appreciative gaze. Gus, sensing the shift in the household's energy, rarely left Clara's side, often resting his head on her lap, a furry guardian. One bitterly cold morning, as the wind howled its mournful tune around the cabin, Clara woke with a sharp gasp. Luke, who had been sleeping lightly in his armchair by the fire, was instantly awake. Her face was contorted in a grimace of pain, her hand pressed against her lower back. "Luke," she whispered, her voice strained. I think it's time." A jolt of adrenaline surged through him, sharp and immediate. He felt a tremor in his own hands, a primal fear mingled with an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This was it. No more waiting, no more preparing. The moment was here. He went to her side, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her sit up. "How often?" he asked, his voice steady despite the rush of his own emotions. "They're coming fast now," she said, her breath catching. "And they're strong." Luke moved with a newfound purpose, his years of responding to ranch emergencies kicking in. He stoked the fire, made sure the room was warm, and then helped Clara to the bed he had prepared. He laid out the clean towels, the warm water, and the simple supplies he had gathered. He was no doctor, but he had a strong constitution, a calm demeanor in a crisis, and a deep-seated desire to ensure Clara and the baby were safe. The hours that followed were a blur of intense focus, of whispered encouragement and shared pain. Clara was incredibly strong, her quiet resilience shining through the waves of discomfort. She gripped his hand, her nails digging into his palm, but he barely noticed the pain. His focus was entirely on her, on the rhythmic contractions, on her labored breathing. He wiped her brow, offered her sips of water, and spoke to her in low, soothing tones, words of encouragement, words of love he hadn't yet dared to voice aloud. "You're doing great, Clara," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion as he watched her. "Just keep going. You're almost there." "I can't," she gasped, her voice raw, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this, Luke." "Yes, you can," he insisted, his gaze unwavering. "You are the strongest woman I know. You got yourself here. You survived. You can do this. I'm right here. We'll do this together. We'll do this together." And they did. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of rose and gold, a new sound filled the cabin, a sound that pierced the quiet stillness and filled the air with pure, unadulterated joy. It was the cry of a newborn baby, loud and clear, a testament to life's enduring power. Luke felt a wave of dizzying relief, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. He carefully caught the tiny, squirming form, his hands, usually so accustomed to the rough hide of cattle, now cradling something impossibly small and fragile. He looked at Clara, her face pale and exhausted but alight with an ethereal glow, and then back at the baby, a tiny girl, pink and perfect, her eyes squeezed shut as she let out another indignant cry. "A girl," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion, a profound tenderness welling up inside him. "Clara, it's a girl." He gently placed the baby on Clara's chest, and watched as she, with trembling hands, reached out and touched her daughter's soft skin. Tears streamed freely down her face, tears of exhaustion, of relief, of overwhelming love. Gus, who had been whining anxiously by the side of the bed, nudged his head against Clara's hand, then let out a soft whimper of approval. "My daughter," Clara whispered, her voice choked with emotion, her fingers tracing the tiny features of her newborn. "She's beautiful, Luke. She's so beautiful." In that moment, Luke realized that his world had not just expanded, it had been irrevocably transformed. He was no longer just Luke McAllister, the reclusive cowboy. He was a man who had helped bring a new life into the world, a man who held a profound connection to the mother and child before him. He felt a fierce, protective love swell within him, a love that encompassed both Clara and their tiny daughter. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he wanted to be a part of their lives, not just as a temporary savior, but as a permanent fixture, a father, a partner. He sat on the edge of the bed, taking Clara's hand in his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "What are you going to name her?" he asked, his voice soft. Clara looked at the baby, then at Luke, a soft smile gracing her lips. "Hope," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "Because she's our hope. She's the start of everything new. Hope." The name resonated with Luke, a powerful symbol of their journey, of the future they were building together. He nodded, a silent agreement, his heart full. The days that followed were a joyous blur of exhaustion and wonder. Hope was a tiny bundle of pure innocence, her small cries and soft coos filling the cabin with a sound more precious than any melody. Luke found himself spending hours just watching her sleep, marveling at the delicate perfection of her fingers and toes, the faint fuzz of her hair. He learned to change diapers, to swaddle her with surprising dexterity, and even to soothe her with a gentle rock and a low hum. He watched Clara with renewed admiration, seeing her transform into a mother, her tired eyes alight with an incandescent love for her daughter. The fear that had once shadowed her gradually began to lift, replaced by a radiant joy. One evening, as Clara held Hope close, rocking her gently by the fire, Luke sat across from them, observing the tender scene. He felt a surge of emotions, a profound gratitude, a fierce love, and a yearning for a future that was suddenly crystal clear. He knew he couldn't keep his feelings to himself any longer. "Clara," he began, his voice a little rough, I know this is a lot, and I know you've been through so much, but I've fallen in love with you." Clara looked up, her blue eyes wide, her rocking motion slowing. A faint blush rose to her cheeks. Hope stirred in her arms, letting out a soft sigh. "And," Luke continued, his gaze unwavering, "I've fallen in love with Hope too. She's remarkable. You both are." He took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "I want to be a part of your lives, Clara, permanently. I want to be her father. I want to build a life here, with you, a family." Silence hung in the air, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and Hope's gentle breathing. Luke watched Clara's face, searching for any sign, any indication of her feelings. He saw surprise, then a slow, hesitant smile. "Luke," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know what to say." "Just say you'll think about it," he urged, his voice soft. "Say you'll consider it. This ranch, this home. It feels different now. It feels right, with you both here." She looked down at Hope, then back at him, her eyes glistening. "It feels right to me too," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "More right than anything I've ever known." The words hung between them, a fragile promise, a new beginning. Luke felt a surge of hope, a profound relief. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There were still challenges ahead, the lingering shadows of her past, the adjustments of building a life together. But looking at Clara, holding their daughter, he knew it was worth it. He had found something more precious than any peace he had ever known. He had found love, and with it, the promise of a family. The reclusive cowboy, who had once sought only solitude, was now ready to embrace a future filled with warmth, laughter, and the joyous chaos of a life truly lived. The blizzard had brought her to him, but it was love that would keep them together, forever intertwined beneath the vast, watchful Montana sky. With Hope's arrival, the cabin, once a bastion of quiet solitude for Luke, transformed into a vibrant hub of new life. The rhythmic hum of the washing machine, filled with tiny clothes, replaced the lone creak of the floorboards. The scent of baby powder mingled with the familiar aroma of wood smoke and coffee. Luke found himself adjusting to a world filled with soft coos, indignant cries, and the pervasive, delightful mess that came with a newborn. And surprisingly, he thrived in it. He learned to differentiate between a hungry cry and a tired cry, to rock Hope to sleep with a gentle sway and a low, rumbling hum that seemed to soothe her instantly. He changed diapers with surprising dexterity, his large, calloused hands remarkably gentle as he navigated the delicate task. Clara, too, blossomed in this new environment. The lingering shadows of her past slowly began to recede, replaced by the radiant glow of motherhood. Her laughter, once hesitant, became more frequent, echoing through the cabin, a sound Luke found himself cherishing. She discovered a hidden talent for crafting, spending hours knitting tiny booties and soft blankets for Hope, her fingers moving with a newfound grace. She spoke of her dreams for Hope, of raising her in a safe, loving environment, far from the fear and turmoil she had known. Luke listened, his heart swelling with a quiet determination to make those dreams a reality. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. The initial tentative steps of companionship had given way to a profound intimacy, built on shared moments of vulnerability and joy. They would spend evenings by the fire, Hope nestled between them, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Clara spoke of her hopes and fears, her childhood memories, and her unwavering belief in the power of a fresh start. Luke, in turn, shared more about his own life, the quiet struggles of ranching, the enduring connection he felt to the land, and the deep abiding love he held for his family, now expanded to include Clara and Hope. One crisp, clear afternoon, as Hope slept soundly in her crib, Clara found Luke in the barn, mending a bridle. She leaned against the wooden frame of the doorway, watching him, a soft smile on her lips. "You're good with your hands," she observed. He looked up, a smudge of grease on his cheek. "Years of practice," he replied, returning her smile. "It's a way of life out here. I can see that," she said, pushing away from the frame. "It's a beautiful life, Luke. So different from what I knew." She paused, her gaze thoughtful. "I never thought I'd find peace like this." Luke put down the bridle, his eyes meeting hers. "You deserve it, Clara," he said, his voice sincere. "More than anyone I know." He stepped closer, his gaze softening. "About what I said. About wanting to be a family." Clara's eyes, those startling blue eyes, met his, and he saw not fear, but a profound yearning. "I've been thinking about it," she admitted, her voice a whisper. "A lot. And Luke, I want it too, more than anything." She took a hesitant step closer. "I'm falling in love with you, Luke McAllister. You and this life you've built. And Hope, she already loves you. She looks at you with so much trust." A wave of pure joy washed over Luke, so potent it left him breathless. He reached out, gently cupping her face in his large hands. "Clara," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear you say that." He leaned in, and their lips met, a tender, tentative kiss that spoke of promises and new beginnings. It was a kiss that sealed their unspoken vows, a declaration of a love forged in the heart of a storm. Their days took on a new glow, filled with the warmth of shared affection and the quiet joy of building a life together. Luke found himself whistling as he worked, his steps lighter, his once somber eyes now sparkling with a newfound contentment. He relished the simple domesticity of their lives, the shared meals, the evenings spent by the fire, the hushed moments when they watched Hope sleep. He saw the world through new eyes, appreciating the subtle beauty of the Montana landscape, the resilience of nature, and the profound strength of human connection. But even in their newfound happiness, the shadows of Clara's past still lingered. She was still careful about answering the phone, still started at unexpected knocks on the door, still had moments of quiet introspection where her gaze would drift to the distant horizon, a hint of unease in her eyes. Luke understood. Healing took time, and the trauma of her past was not something that could be erased overnight. He made sure she knew he was there for her, a steady presence, a shield against the world. He reassured her repeatedly that she was safe, that he would protect her and hope, no matter what. One afternoon, as Luke was making a supply run to the nearest town, a small dusty outpost that served as the lifeline for the surrounding ranches, he decided to take a cautious step toward securing Clara's peace of mind. He visited the sheriff's office, a small, unassuming building with creaky floorboards, and a perpetually tired-looking sheriff named Brody. "Brody," Luke began, after the usual pleasantries, "I need to talk to you about something." He spoke in hushed tones, recounting Clara's story, omitting the more intimate details but emphasizing the abuse and her desperate flight. He explained his concerns about her husband potentially tracking her down. Brody, a man who had seen his share of hardship in the hills, listened intently, his expression grave. "I can put out a general alert," Brody said, his voice low. "If he shows up, we'll know about it. But without a formal complaint from her, there's not much we can do proactively beyond that. It's a tricky situation with domestic cases, especially if she hasn't pressed charges." "She's scared," Luke explained. "She doesn't want to stir anything up, especially with the baby." Brody nodded, understanding. "I get it. But tell her, if he ever shows his face here, or even near here, she needs to tell me. We'll deal with him, and until then, I'll keep an eye out. Word travels fast in these parts, Luke. If he's asking around, someone will hear about it." Luke left the sheriff's office with a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a start. He knew that their true security lay in their remote location and in his unwavering vigilance. As weeks turned into months, hope grew, a tiny bundle of pure delight, her bright eyes and infectious gurgles filling their lives with boundless joy. She began to crawl, then to pull herself up, her small hands exploring everything within reach. Clara's confidence as a mother soared, and with it, her inner strength seemed to solidify. The fear in her eyes was almost entirely gone, replaced by a radiant peace. She talked about wanting to contribute more to the ranch, to learn about the horses, to help with the garden. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. Luke found himself proposing, not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet, heartfelt sincerity one evening as they sat by the fire, Hope asleep in her bassinet. He simply held out a small, intricately carved wooden ring, a family heirloom that had belonged to his grandmother. "Clara," he said, his voice a little shaky, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build our family here, truly. Will you marry me?" Clara's eyes widened, then filled with tears. She looked at the ring, then at Luke, her face radiant. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Oh yes, Luke, 1,000 times yes." They celebrated quietly, a shared moment of profound joy, their future stretching out before them, bright and full of promise. They planned a small, intimate wedding at the ranch, just the two of them, Hope and Brody as their witness, when the spring thaw finally allowed for easier travel. It would be a ceremony that symbolized their journey, a testament to the unexpected paths that lead to true happiness. The wedding day dawned crisp and clear, the last vestiges of winter giving way to the vibrant green of spring. The air was filled with the scent of pine and fresh earth, and the distant sound of birdsong. Clara, in a simple white dress, looked radiant, her eyes shining with joy. Luke, in his best denim and a freshly pressed shirt, his hair neatly combed, looked undeniably handsome, his gaze fixed on her with an unwavering adoration. Brody, looking uncharacteristically formal in a clean suit, stood witness, a quiet smile on his face. As they exchanged their vows, simple words that carried immense weight, Luke looked at Clara, then at Hope, who gurgled happily in her mother's arms, and a profound sense of rightness settled over him. This was his family. This was his home. The reclusive cowboy, who had once lived in quiet solitude, had found something infinitely more valuable. A love that had blossomed in the heart of a blizzard, a family built on resilience, hope, and an unbreakable bond. Life on the M.C. Allister Ranch settled into a comfortable, fulfilling rhythm after the wedding. Spring transitioned into a glorious Montana summer, the hills bursting with wildflowers, the air alive with the hum of insects and the distant lowing of cattle. Hope, now a robust and perpetually curious toddler, filled their days with laughter and endless discovery. She took her first wobbly steps in the cabin living room, her small hands grasping at Luke's outstretched fingers, her infectious giggle echoing through the once silent space. Luke, in turn, found a deep joy in teaching her the names of the animals, showing her how to feed the chickens, and letting her help him in the garden, her tiny hands delightedly digging in the rich earth. Clara thrived in her new role as wife and mother. She embraced ranch life with an eagerness that surprised Luke. She learned to ride a horse, albeit slowly at first, and developed a keen eye for the nuances of the land. She spent hours in the newly expanded garden, cultivating rows of vibrant vegetables and fragrant herbs, her efforts providing fresh produce for their table. Her creativity flourished. She painted landscapes of the surrounding hills, her canvases capturing the dramatic beauty of their home. The fear that had once shadowed her was now a distant memory, replaced by an inner peace that radiated from her. Their love story continued to deepen, woven into the fabric of their daily lives. They built a life together, brick by brick, moment by moment. Luke, the man of few words, found himself expressing his affection through small, meaningful gestures, a gentle touch on her arm, a shared smile over Hope's latest antics, a quiet word of reassurance after a long day. Clara, in turn, showered him with warmth and appreciation, her presence a constant source of light and comfort. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rugged peaks, painting the sky in fiery hues, they sat on the porch swing, Hope asleep inside. Clara leaned her head on Luke's shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "I still can't believe this is my life," she murmured, her voice soft. "Sometimes I wake up and I expect it all to be a dream." Luke wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "It's real, Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Every bit of it, and it's ours. I used to think I was broken," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper, "that I would never find a place where I belonged, a love that was truly safe." He squeezed her gently. "You're not broken, Clara. You're the strongest woman I know. And you belong right here, with us." He knew the shadows of her past would always be a part of her story, a testament to her resilience. But they no longer defined her. She had chosen a new path, and he was honored to walk it with her. As the years passed, the McAllister Ranch continued to flourish. Hope grew into a vibrant, curious child, her spirit as wild and free as the Montana wind. She inherited her mother's striking blue eyes and her father's quiet strength. She loved exploring the ranch, trailing after Luke as he tended to the animals, her small voice chattering with endless questions. She learned to ride a horse with confidence, her laughter ringing out across the open fields. Clara expanded her artistic pursuits, her paintings gaining recognition in local galleries, bringing in a small but welcome income. She became an active member of the small community, lending her gentle wisdom and unwavering support to those in need. Luke, proud beyond words, watched her with endless admiration, seeing the woman she had truly become, confident, compassionate, and utterly at peace. Their love deepened, evolving into a quiet, profound understanding. They knew each other's thoughts with a glance, shared a silent language of affection and respect. The initial passionate fire had settled into a steady, comforting warmth, like the glowing embers of a well-tended fire, a testament to years of shared laughter, quiet support, and unwavering devotion. One autumn afternoon, years after Clara had first collapsed on his porch, Luke stood by the fence, watching Hope, now a spirited young girl, gallop across the fields on a pony, her laughter carried on the wind. Clara joined him, slipping her hand into his. "She's so fair," Clara said, a soft smile on her face. "Just like her father." Luke chuckled, squeezing her hand. "She's got her mother's heart, though. That kindness, that resilience, that's all you." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their daughter. The vast Montana landscape stretched out before them, rugged and beautiful, just as it had always been. But now, it was no longer a symbol of solitude for Luke. It was a backdrop to a life he had built, a life filled with love, laughter, and the quiet joy of family. "Remember that first night?" Clara asked, her voice soft, a hint of wonder in her tone. "The blizzard. I thought I was going to die on your porch." "I remember," Luke said, his gaze fixed on her, his eyes filled with a tenderness that spoke volumes. "I remember thinking I was about to lose my peace and quiet." He paused, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Turns out, I gained so much more." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, her hand tightening around his. "You gave me everything, Luke," she whispered. "A home, a family, a future." He turned to her, his hand gently cupping her chin, tilting her face up to his. "And you, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a reason to live, a reason to truly open my heart. You gave me hope." He leaned in and kissed her, a deep, tender kiss that was a culmination of their journey. The desperate stranger on his porch, the protective cowboy, the hesitant courtship, the joyous birth, and the years of building a life together. It was a kiss that sealed their legacy, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest blessings arrive disguised as a raging storm, bringing with them not chaos, but the quiet, profound miracle of true love and innate, unexpected, beautiful family. The Montana hills, silent witnesses to their journey, stood tall and unchanging. But within their embrace, a love story had blossomed, as enduring and timeless as the mountains themselves. The years spun by like the turning seasons, each one etching deeper lines of contentment onto Luke's face and adding layers of vibrant life to the once solitary cabin. Hope, a whirlwind of boundless energy and infectious curiosity, transformed their days. Her small boots, perpetually muddy, left trails across the worn floorboards, a tangible testament to the life that now overflowed within their walls. She was a keen observer, absorbing every detail of the ranch, her questions endless and often profoundly insightful, forcing Luke and Clara to articulate their own understanding of the world around them. Luke found a joy in fatherhood he'd never anticipated. He taught Hope to identify animal tracks in the snow, to distinguish between the different calls of the birds, and to appreciate the quiet majesty of a sunrise over the mountains. He built her a small treehouse overlooking the creek, a secret fort where she would spend hours, her imagination soaring. He saw Clara's spirit mirrored in Hope's bright eyes, and Luke's own quiet determination in her steadfast refusal to give up on a challenge. Their bond was immediate and unbreakable, built on shared laughter and silent understanding. Clara, too, found an unparalleled fulfillment in motherhood and partnership. Her artistic endeavors flourished. Her paintings, initially a means of quiet expression, now gained a local following, their vibrant hues capturing the wild beauty of Montana and the serene warmth of their home. She started a small online shop, sending her landscapes and portraits of ranch life to distant admirers, connecting their isolated haven to the wider world in a way Luke had never imagined. She became adept at writing, her initial cautiousness giving way to a graceful ease as she moved through the fields on her mare, a constant companion to Luke during branding season or fence repairs. The ranch, once alien territory, was now unequivocally her home, her sanctuary, and the foundation of her dreams. Their marriage was a tapestry woven with threads of deep respect, unwavering support, and a love that had matured into a quiet, comforting warmth. They had learned each other's rhythms, anticipated needs, and found profound solace in simply being together. Even during the demanding days of calving season or the unforgiving bite of winter, their shared resilience and unwavering commitment to each other and their family remained a constant source of strength. They communicated not just through words, but through glances, shared smiles, and the subtle comfort of a hand reaching out to find another. Despite the profound peace they had found, the echoes of Clara's past never entirely vanished, though they faded with each passing year. A new story on the nightly news about a domestic dispute, a casual question from an unfamiliar face in town, or even a sudden, loud noise could still cause a momentary flicker of apprehension in Clara's eyes. Luke was keenly aware of these subtle shifts, his protective instincts remaining as sharp as ever. He would subtly check on her, offer a reassuring touch, or simply meet her gaze with a silent promise of security. They had a pact, unspoken, yet understood. Their home was a fortress of love, and no shadow from the past would be allowed to penetrate its walls. One crisp autumn morning, as Hope was starting her first year of elementary school, a subtle shift occurred. The school bus, a bright yellow intrusion into their quiet road, marked a new chapter. It meant Hope would be interacting with a wider world, and with that, a slight increase in their vulnerability. Luke and Clara had discussed it at length, weighing the benefits of Hope's education against the risk of her father potentially tracing them. Brody, the sheriff, had remained a quiet ally, ensuring their address remained confidential and keeping an unspoken watch over their well-being. One afternoon, a letter arrived, forwarded through the local post office, addressed to Clara Hayes. It was from a law firm in a distant state, bland and official-looking. Clara opened it with trembling hands, her face paling as she read the contents. It was a formal notice of divorce proceedings initiated by her ex-husband, a procedural step that legally severed their ties, but also served as a stark reminder of the man she had fled. He had finally decided to move on, legally. The fear was momentary, sharp, then slowly dissipated, replaced by a wave of unexpected relief. The formal end of that chapter, while jarring, also felt like a final release, a definitive closure. "It's over," she whispered, her voice fragile, looking up at Luke, tears welling in her eyes. "It's really over. He can't hurt us anymore." Luke enveloped her in a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair. "He never could, Clara," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Not really. You were always stronger than him, and you were always safe here." This moment of official closure allowed them to truly breathe, to fully embrace the present and the future without the looming threat of the past. Their love, already strong, deepened with this newfound freedom, a quiet triumph over adversity. As Hope grew, the ranch became her playground, her classroom, and her sanctuary. She learned to ride like the wind, her braids flying behind her, her laughter echoing across the vast fields. She spent hours in the barn with Luke, learning the nuances of horse care, the rhythm of ranch work, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. She inherited her father's practicality and her mother's empathy, a balanced blend that made her a remarkable young woman. Clara often found them sitting by the creek, Luke teaching Hope to skip stones, their heads bent in quiet conversation, a scene that filled her heart with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. They expanded the ranch, investing in sustainable farming practices and introducing new breeds of cattle. Luke's quiet innovation, combined with Clara's practical business acumen, allowed them to thrive even during lean years. The old cabin, too, saw transformations. A new, larger kitchen was added, filled with the warmth of Clara's cooking and Hope's cheerful chatter. A sprawling porch wrapped around the front, offering panoramic views of the mountains, a favorite spot for evening meals and quiet conversations under the vast, star-studded Montana sky. Their life was not without its challenges. There were harsh winters that tested their endurance, unexpected repairs that strained their resources, and the universal trials of raising a spirited child. But they faced them together, a united front, their individual strengths complementing each other. Luke's steady hand and pragmatic approach balanced Clara's intuitive leaps and emotional depth. They were a team, forged in the crucible of unexpected circumstances, strengthened by unwavering love. As Hope entered her teenage years, she became more independent, her world expanding beyond the ranch. She excelled in school, demonstrating a keen intellect and a compassionate heart. She spoke of dreams of attending college, of exploring the world beyond the familiar mountain peaks. Luke and Clara listened, their hearts a mixture of pride and a gentle sadness at the thought of her leaving. They knew they had given her roots, and now it was time to give her wings. One summer evening, years after Hope had left for college, leaving a quiet hum in the cabin that was once filled with her energy, Luke and Clara sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. Their hair was touched with silver. Their hands, clasped together, bore the marks of a lifetime of work and love. Gus, now an old, slow dog, rested his head on Luke's foot, a loyal presence until the end of his days, a silent witness to their enduring journey. "She called today," Clara said, her voice soft, a contented smile on her face. "Hope. She got the internship she wanted." "That's our girl," Luke replied, a quiet pride in his voice. "Always reaching for something more." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, just as she had so many years ago. "Remember when I first arrived here?" she mused, her voice tinged with distant memory. "Broken, terrified, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a baby on the way." Luke tightened his arm around her, his gaze sweeping over the familiar landscape, the home they had built together. "And I was a man living in the past, afraid to let anyone in." He paused, a genuine smile spreading across his lips. Who would have thought a blizzard could bring so much light into a life? Clara looked up at him, her blue eyes, though softened by time, still held the spark that had first drawn him in. "It wasn't just the blizzard, Luke," she said, her voice filled with profound affection. "It was you, your kindness, your strength, your willingness to open your door and then your heart to a complete stranger." He leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "And you, Clara," he whispered, "you brought me everything I never knew I needed. You gave me a future worth fighting for." The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the valley into a soft twilight, but the warmth between them remained, a steady, unwavering flame. Their love story, born in a desperate storm, had blossomed into a testament to resilience, compassion, and the profound power of an unexpected connection. They were two souls, once lost and solitary, who had found each other on a wind-swept Montana porch, building a legacy not just of land and cattle, but of unwavering love, enduring hope, and a family that had grown as vast and as beautiful as the endless sky above them. The silence of the night settled around them, a comforting blanket, no longer a void, but a quiet space filled with the echoes of a life richly lived, and the promise of many more peaceful years to come.